Okay, welcome, Geoffrey Philip, to uh, Talking with Poets, this on again, off again show that I run on YouTube, what I call the Poetry Channel. And delighted to be speaking with you this morning about your latest book of poems, Archipelagos. Uh, Geoffrey, tell us where you're speaking to us from, and tell us a little bit about when this book came out and the roots of the book. What led you to
Okay.
call the book Archipelagos? Let's call it that. Start there.
Well, the the title. Let's deal with the title. The
Yeah.
title of the book is actually taken from. It's an homage to Derek Walcott, and in his I'm forgetting which book, but anyway, the poem begins at the end of this sentence. Rain will begin,
Mm.
and that line has always haunted me. So. When Monique Roffey asked me to write a poem for Writer's Mosaic, which is for the section that Colin Grant was doing, I started to write this poem, which was during the lockdown. And
Okay.
a lot of things happened
Right. Right. Right.
during the lockdown. So I started the title poem was actually commissioned, and I started working on it. And about 6 weeks later, uh, I saw a post by Diana Macaulay, to whom the book is dedicated to her. Uh, she pointed out the two books that became the underpinning for Archipelagos. Well, actually three, but the two are by Amitav Ghosh, the Nutmeg Skirts and the Great Derangement, and the other is the Amy Cesaire's Return of the Native. And so that was where it suddenly occurred to me
Right.
that indeed all of Western thought, all of Western ideas about how we should live and everything else has been corrupted by uh, colonial settler
Mm.
mentality. And so everything has been skewed. And so we really need to be starting over from a position of not seeing the earth and the landscape as how we've been taught to look at it for the past 200 years, which is to look at it as something inert, dead, not not
Right.
alive.
Right.
Whereas most indigenous religions, including, although it doesn't fall into that category, Rastafari, who have always viewed the earth as a living thing. And that's where my background comes in, because I grew up at the time in Jamaica when Rastafari was just coming into its own power. This was
Right.
the era
Right.
of Bob Marley and the
Right.
12 tribes of Israel, and reggae was all around you. And so all of this, and of course the influence of Derek Walcott and Kamal Brathwaite's incredible lecture that he gave called Middle Passages. And one of the warnings that he gave in that was that Caribbean poets are in danger whenever they stray from the initial catastrophe that created the Caribbean, which is, I don't know if it's been disproved yet, but we're still going with it. Um, of that comet hitting and wiping out everything, and this is how you have the Gulf of Mexico and these archipelagos of islands that are in the Caribbean. But in that realization of the archipelagos of islands that that are within the Caribbean basin, it suddenly made me realize of these other archipelagos all around the world that face similar threats from climate change, which is what the book is all about.
Right, right. Incredible how you tie in. I mean, the Brathwaite quote about, in other words, if you stray away from writing about the origin story of
Yes. Yes.
then you are lost. In other words, if you start aping, I don't know, the latest fad in English poetry or American poetry or something,
Yes. Yes.
then you're away from your mission or your purpose, which
And
is to
and
get
and
back to
and
the
you
origin.
and you end up in this position of endless navel gazing, and
Mm,
your poetry never reaches out beyond. It's like during the lockdown, I began to also write haiku,
mm,
and one of the things that this scholar, his name is Shireen, talks about is the x and the y axes of haiku,
mm,
and one is the present, but then there's the y-axis of eternity,
mm, mm, mm.
and in that y-axis of eternity you can draw on all of these other associations that Basho and Buson and the other haiku masters used. But because we have gotten haiku primarily through translation, number one, we've lost a lot of the music. So a lot of people are just writing haiku that is only cerebral,
Yes,
but they've lost sight of the music. Which, if you listen to Japanese haiku, it has a lot
right,
of music in there.
right.
So because we got it in translation, we've lost the ability to listen to the music of the poem. And as Derek Walcott wrote in my friend Mervyn Taylor's book, and Mervyn talks about it, he handed in a poem to Walcott, and Walcott scribbled in the margins,
Donde está la música?
"Donde está la música?"
Right,
So that, I mean, these are the twin poles that I'm working with.
right.
On the one hand, there's an intellectual appreciation of what is happening, but also once you stray from the music, you're moving away from the pleasure, not just the intellectual pleasure, but the music of the poem, which will get inside your body.
Why don't we turn to some of the listening to some of the music? Perhaps, and um, perhaps right at the beginning, a colonial discourse, or what, or I'll let you read a few poems from the book, and then we'll
Okay,
come back to it. How's that?
okay. Let's start with colonial discourse.
Right.
At the brink of dawn, Aimé Césaire stood on the balcony of his apartment in Martinique and watched the sunlight spread like a rash across the back of the city, inert as the drowned woman floating along the Caput River, her bloated body buoyed by waves flowing into the Caribbean Sea, where Columbus and his crew, spurred by fever, scoured streams, lakes, rivers for traces of gold, and in their delirium ran the Santa Maria aground in Hispaniola, where they erected a military fort like the one in Port de France, occupied by French sailors who had broken the bonds of dependency by bludgeoning school children, raping their mothers, and whipping their fathers until they folded their arms amid squalor, never once looking at the orange trees that blossomed on the Carbet peaks, or at the rows of sugarcane crushed and distilled by Le Galion that had kept them dociles for generations, dying for civilization.
Hmm. Powerful finish, dying for civilization. You know, uh, go ahead. Why don't you read
No,
it?
no. Well,
No, we can stop
it
there for a
takes
minute.
upon this idea,
Yeah,
that Frantz Fanon talks about.
right.
How we're literally killing ourselves in the process of trying to become something that we are not, something that our sensibilities do not. It's like when Brathwaite talks about the hurricane does not roar in pentameters. It's that whole idea that we're a Caribbean people. We have a rhythm to our lives, and that rhythm should be reflected in our poetry, and not necessarily the sort of strict iambic pentameter, which suggests order, which suggests a sort of idea that everything is going to last forever. And we know in the Caribbean, we are making up, we're improvising, which is why Brathwaite loved jazz so much.
Right.
We're improvising every day. This has been the Black experience through blues and jazz, this idea of improvisation, this idea of making, as again, Brathwaite says, something torn and new.
Beautiful, beautiful. But tell me, when we think about Walcott, though, and writing Omeros and then writing, the classics console, but not enough.
Yes,
So
yes.
what do you think he means there? I mean, you mean that the forms console, but not enough, that we need something else?
Precisely,
Yeah,
precisely.
yeah,
And I mean, in one of the first books I wrote, um, I actually wrote using the sonnet style, uh, but it was written in Jamaican patois,
yeah.
you know,
Okay.
and so and 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 one critic didn't know what to do with it, which is why you can't really listen to critics, because he said something like, while they don't scan properly, you forget these, you
Mm-hmm.
never forget these insults and
Right, right,
slights.
right, right.
it doesn't scan properly. But
Right.
he went on to talk about the strength of the poem and everything else. But, and to be honest, and to be fair, lots of times I don't know what I'm doing. I forget who said it, either Mervyn or perhaps you said it, that the poem is smarter than you are.
Ah, yes, yeah.
The poem is smarter than you are, and it's not until maybe sometimes 5 years later you go, okay, that's what I was talking about. I get it now. But the logical and the musical progression of it leads you to believe that this is something important. And so, I mean, you put it down and you publish it and you put it in a book. I mean, I'm finding poems from my first book of poems. And I was like, wow, 30 years later, oh, this is what I was talking about.
Right.
It's really shocking.
Amazing. Breaking the sonnet barrier is what I'm calling an essay called Sonnet. So, so I'm also thinking about this issue. But
Yes,
tell me in that first poem in the book, you talk about Hispaniola and Columbus's arrival there, and
yes,
you talk about Martinique and Césaire and Césaire's return. But so you're bringing these two different sort of transgressions or events together, and difference in time too, because
yes.
when Columbus landed, they didn't set up a colony as such, just then,
Right.
right? So tell me about that.
Well,
Why you put those two
um, the,
together
the,
in the same colonial discourse?
uh, they're part of the same crime, which is
Okay,
why in colonial discourse it names all of these mass murderers
right,
who were complicit in the crimes against people of African descent, and 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 so it moves through and even moves to King Leopold,
right,
who set
right,
up in the again. It's making these connections that yes, although the Congo is not part of the Caribbean diaspora, some of us do share uh, DNA from the Congo. So not only is there a sort of geographical connection, um, but there is also a genetic connection, you know, and the crimes that Leopold did in the Congo. I
right,
mean, chopping off hands, when I mean, the body count reached about 10 million Africans that were either killed or mutilated, and for what? Rubber, but this is what the vast wealth of the Congo was exported then to Belgium, and is a wealth on which and Belgium is not alone. All of the colonial powers
right.
benefited from the exploitation of their colonies, and so in fact that's why some of them still don't want to give up their colonies.
So how do you I mean, there are some great poets and writers have come out of the archipelago, the Caribbean, and we've talked about Walcott a bit, and Kamau Brathwaite, and then you have Naipaul, the novelist.
Yes,
and
who I looked at to write my early books of short stories.
Right.
I mean, I studied Naipaul, I studied Sam Selvon. Those were the two big ones.
Right.
Because I could take apart and notice a craft and go, oh, here's okay, all those things you learn in graduate school, and then suddenly here's the inciting incident, here's this. So in that way, they became teachable writers. Something that Robert Frost talks about, which is why some dismiss his poetry, because he is in fact too teachable. But that's another story. But I think part of being a poet is also, especially now, listen to me, at my age, dropping breadcrumbs, for other poets to figure it out along the way.
Yes.
And certainly, for me with Naipaul and Sam Selvon, they provided enough breadcrumbs for me to figure out how to write a short story within a Caribbean landscape.
Very good. And you of course, you also have a career as a writer of fiction, right? You have novels.
Yes.
And short story. But aside from the technical assistance, reading Sylvan or Naipaul, the colonial point, I mean, where Naipaul is attacked because he talks about the half-made societies and so on. But I think just as a crafter of prose, the English sentence, he is amazing.
Of course.
Yeah.
The only other person that I think comes close to the clarity of Naipaul is James Baldwin. And this is why I sort of gravitated towards Baldwin, because Baldwin comes with the power of the King James Bible,
That's right.
and the blues and everything else, and so it is so. Yes, I discovered Naipaul and the absolute perfection of his sentences that you rub your head afterwards. But then when I discovered James Baldwin, I was just like, this man, I mean, I'm still reading him now, especially now when his work seems so relevant to what we're going through right now.
Right. Tell me about schooling, because you went to, I think it was Jamaica College, which and then of course Paul went to was it Queen's Park College? I can't remember.
Yes.
In Trinidad. But
yes.
and then Naipaul went to Oxford, and you were in Jamaica College. Tell us about your education, the education of the poet from and onwards, and also what you found when you came to the United States, because you write, and perhaps you could read that poem or poems from the book where those early experiences of the encounter with the ignorant and the
yes.
Yeah.
Well, I went to Jamaica College, which is the second oldest college or high school in Jamaica.
Right.
And I was lucky to have had the poet Dennis Scott, who won the Commonwealth Prize for Poetry in 1972 as my literature teacher. And he was also an old boy of Jamaica College and was, in fact, a head boy at Jamaica College. And so it was Dennis who really started me on the path of writing poems. And then I went through and I passed my O levels, and then I passed my A levels, but I didn't pass enough A levels to be admitted into the University of the West Indies. And then we had our troubles in 1979. So I left Jamaica the 30th of April 1979, and I ended up in Miami, Florida, when I said Derek Walcott, even to my English teachers, they didn't know who this man was. So it was encountering a lot of ignorance about Caribbean writer, and people still talk to us about, oh, you're from the islands, as if they were indistinguishable from each other. But like Walcott said, islands are only real if we have loved in them. So I continued writing, graduated, went to the University of Miami, where I gained or earned 2 James Michener fellowships in poetry and in prose. And my imagine this, my mentor in the poetry section was Kamau Brathwaite. And my mentor in the prose section was George Brathwaite. It was George Lamming.
Oh, Lamming.
And then we were surrounded by these luminaries who had not yet, in the prose section of it, we had Edwidge Danticat.
Oh my!
And Lamming was amazed by her writing even then. We had people like Michael Anthony. We had people like Brian Antoni. All of these were my classmates in the prose section. And then in the poetry section, we had Velma Pollard. I couldn't believe that I was sitting down beside someone as good a poet as Velma was. Shara McCallum was also a fellow. So it was just this meeting up of incredible poets. We were all young and everything else. We were just up and it was just, my God, this is amazing. We're sitting in the same room, breathing the same air as Kamau Brathwaite.
Amazing.
Yes.
And Lamming was teaching that in Miami at the
yes.
time. Okay.
Yes.
After
he had been invited.
Yeah.
Yes. After he had written those amazing books. Yeah. And of course, the how certain things happened was, you got the inside scoop on how Brathwaite said he would never read. When they were in England together as students, he would never read after George Lamming, to quote him, because George had his big organ voice. The double entendre there was just amazing. But it was those little tidbits, those little things that you don't read in the official biography.
Right.
That amused and made us and humanized both Brathwaite and Lamming for me, because before they were just these unapproachable people whose books I read and pored over, millions of times, and then here I was with them.
But you've also brushed on the field, played football with Bali, and I mean,
yeah,
before coming to
yeah, that was interesting. Now that I'm retired, I'm going back over all of these things that have been happening in my life, and it almost reminds me of that quote by Schopenhauer, how it seems as if your life has a plot, but you're in fact making it up. But I'll continue making it up because it's fun.
Yeah, no, I mean, I happened to read your piece about playing football with him, and then I saw the film One Love the other day,
Yes,
and I was just thinking,
same play, the same right inside there. I wish I had pictures, but never Garrick. I used to play football with Garrick too, and
yeah,
also the percussionist, Seco Patterson. Seco is the one who really I hung out with the most. Seco first, then Garrick, then some of the other players, Golding who played guitar for Bob Marley and the Wailers. But yeah, it was it was an amazing time to be growing up in Jamaica at that time because I mean Bob was moving through and I was hanging out with Michael Mort, whose sound system was called Jalove Music. And it was at Jalove Music or in his house that I learned about Marcus Garvey, that I learned about. I still have a CD that he burned for me somewhere here with all of the original songs by like Don Drummond, Me Too, before reggae was even
oh my, amazing,
created.
right, right,
And this is the music that they were listening to and growing up on and giving each other nicknames about. So it was just I can't imagine another period like it because it was so culturally rich.
right,
They everything was just bombarded. There wasn't a day when you weren't being bombarded with stimuli of just. It was an amazing, and plus teenager hormones.
yeah.
So
And what about Rastafarian? What the Rastafarianism, and what is your relationship with with Rastafarianism? With
I would say 90%, 80 to 90% of my friends are Rastafari or Rastafari influence. The rest of them are just ball heads who I like to hang out with, but that's a different story. But for me, Rastafari. I don't, I don't, I, I don't believe in the divinity of Haile Selassie. But then again, when we say namaste, aren't we recognizing the divinity in each other? So it's, it's a fraught situation. But I think Rastafari brought to the table a lot more than just the divinity of Haile Selassie. They brought, for me, most importantly, the idea of one love, that we're all connected,
right,
chemically,
right, right,
biologically,
right.
everywhere else, that, we're now being told is called quantum entanglement. Uh, uh, and they summed up all of this in two phrases. Number one, I and I. So Rastafari never say I and you. They say I and I, right? So that is an immediate equation there of you
Right,
and I are the same, brother,
right, right,
right? And then one love, which it encompasses all of us in the human experience. And if you take it even further, when you learn about the idea of quantum entanglement, it means that you and the Buddha and Jesus are on the same plane because we all came out of the Big Bang. Time is just the way that our senses can deal with it. But as Einstein said, time doesn't exist. So this is why I can put all of these events in the same poem, because in the blip of eternity, they exist. All of them exist on the same
plane. Yeah.
plane.
Now, I'll throw a word out to you, Whitman, and Song of Myself, and
Yes.
I and it's not I, but it's you. You is in I. So how is
Yes,
that related to I and one love? I mean,
it's the same idea.
same idea. Okay.
It's the same idea. And the mystics have always said this. The mystics have always talked about the you know, room, all of them, especially the mystic poets, have always come back to this idea of the oneness of humanity.
Mm.
Rastafari just puts it in a different way of, you know, repurposing the English language and not saying things like humanity, which again separates it. They say humanity, you know, and they don't say appreciate, because the last part of it, "ate," sounds too much like hate. Rastafari are very conscious of the sounds of words, so they will say appreciate love, and Rastafari will never say hello because it contains the word hell. This is why Rastafari, which I have used a lot of times, Rastafari say greetings.
Greetings. Oh, thank you.
So you know, hanging around Rastafari, you have to be always be aware. You know, Rastafari says word, sound is power, or word, sound, and power. You always have to be aware of what is coming out of your mouth, which leads us back to the Buddha and right speech. You know, be aware of the sounds that and the kinds of ideas that you're putting out there, because these words have power.
Exactly. Well done. Now let's go to the poetry from the book. Perhaps I'll let you select, but I was going to ask you earlier about the poems about your on your arrival and those
Oh, that one.
that
Yeah,
encounter.
that one was that one was, you know, and it took me a lot of time to write it, because the thing happened, but
Mm,
I couldn't figure out why it happened or how it happened. And then suddenly I was while I was writing it, I was like, oh, this is one and the same
mm,
of the sort of erasure
right.
of of an African presence. And strangely enough, with what is happening with Kamala right now, with calling her a DEI candidate,
Right.
uh, you know, just demeaning all of the accomplishments. So in this poem, I was called an equal opportunity candidate for this another fellowship, and one or a couple of the other candidates. The officials probably didn't know about this, but you know, we always have people who are passing,
Mm-mm.
you know, in these situations. And, you know, she called me over and she said, you know, brother, they're calling you the equal opportunity candidate. And I was like, what? And I was just shocked. Anyway, let me read the poem.
Yes, thanks.
American Welcome. I'll never forget the first time when, as a recent arrival to America, I'd taken a fellowship for a month-long residency in Seaside, Florida, where no two houses on the same street are allowed to have the same picket fence. And eager to escape the white noise of the Lyceum, modeled after Jefferson's academic village, where I'd been dubbed the equal opportunity candidate, I wandered outside the gates on my morning jog, as if I was still that privileged schoolboy who could go anywhere he wanted, when a pickup truck with 6 or so rednecks swilling beer on a flatbed, they might as well have been on a hunt and wearing white robes, pulled over to the other side of the road. A bottle whizzed by while I was tying my shoelaces, and they screamed, "Nigger!" I looked behind me to find the target of their anger, for Garvey had taught me long ago never to answer to that name, and then jumped out of the way before another bottle exploded near my feet. I continued my journey toward the outskirts of the town, but now always looking over my shoulder, always running, always out of breath.
A devastating poem. And now will have to say I will not read after Geoffrey Philip, because that's an amazing presentation of that.
Thank you.
Very powerful,
Thank you.
lacerating poem. I mean, when I read that poem, I was brought back to my childhood, actually landing in London as an 8-year-old, 9-year-old. I was walking close to home, and then this woman came by on a black, old woman in black hat, black
Right.
robes, and she screamed all this abuse at me, nigger and
Right.
Sambo and
Yes.
dog, and I was terrified. I was about, I didn't know what to do. It came out of the blue, out of nowhere for me.
Yes.
And it seared me, and it stayed with me. And I've written about it, but I mean, but anyway, the bottle almost hitting you.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
God.
And the thing was, I mean, it's also my naivete, but also the sort of idea that in Jamaica I could go anywhere I want. I mean,
Right,
my
right.
my class, my skin color, my class, everything else gave me certain privileges that I could go anywhere in Jamaica, and not run into any problems. And here I was now in America, where I thought I could just go outside the gates of this sealed off place. I could leave the Garden of Eden
Right,
and
right,
not
right, right.
and not run into any problems.
Right.
And immediately as I stepped out, here was the problem.
Like the Buddha leaving his so
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
seeing the real world.
See, yes, this first real big encounter with the real world. Which is quite different from Jamaica, because I grew up in a black country where you had black prime ministers, black people running everything, and to be now in a new space where I was now the other.
Right, right.
Which was amazing.
Which of course raised the whole thing about how the Caribbean leaders' influence on sort of the American racial questions. I mean, you mentioned earlier Marcus Garvey, and then just the idea. I mean, here we have Kamala Harris, whose father is Jamaican, mother is Tamil, actually from South India.
Yes.
But grew up with the mother. I mean, with a single family. The two daughters.
Right.
So the father's not brought up very much. I guess he did not was not around much.
Right.
And
I think he left when she was about 6 years old.
6 years old.
But part of the whole idea surrounding with Garvey, and I don't know how my brothers and sisters here in the US are going to work this out. But Garvey gave us two ideas to go with, right? The first was gain independence, right? Which is how we have the idea of Black nationalism, right? Okay. In Jamaica, we've already solved that problem. We gained our independence, right?
Right.
I don't know. I don't know how Black nationalism works in the USA. So that's the first, how it's going to work. I don't know, and I have no idea. But in the places where Garvey's idea about Black nationalism has worked and has inspired nations, Malcolm X talks about it. Every time you see another Black nation gaining its independence, point to Marcus Garvey.
Yes.
So the first was gain your independence. Okay, we've gained our independence. But the second charge, which was emancipate yourselves from mental slavery, and that we haven't done. That we have not done. We still have parishes in Jamaica named St. Anne, St. Mary, all
Right.
of these place names, which Kai Miller also talks about in his poetry. But to get back to the an acquaintance of mine, Wayne Chen, has drawn up a new map of Jamaica, and instead of calling it St. Anne, he is proposing that we call it Garvey. And wouldn't it be great, 5 years from now, a child growing up in what used to be St. Anne's or St. Anne says, I come from Garvey. So it's this actual renaming in our own image that Brathwaite talks about a lot. That is still the big work to be done, of renaming our landscape, renaming the things in our experience. Walcott hints at it when he talks about the new Adam and naming things, So that is a big task. But I think many of the writers now have lost, which is why you have a friend of mine called me part of the geriatric avant-garde. But
That's sort of it.
but it's to bring back these not the geriatric, the geriatric rear guard. That was what she called me, the geriatric rear guard. But it's to bring back these whole ideas that were so prevalent when I was growing up, and which can still work again.
And they can. I come from Ceylon, a country that no longer exists. I mean, it's been renamed Sri Lanka, right?
Right.
And so for me, my associations as a child with Ceylon, and then you have the word Elam, which is the name for the Tamil nation in the
Right.
north and east. And then there was a civil war that lasted, 26 years or something, about Tamil nation, about Tamil
Right.
identity,
Yes.
and respecting the rights of the minority to have to their own self-determination. So you have this. So the notion of renaming is it's a fraught issue. I mean, it's something
Yes,
constantly on mind.
because and this is what is happening in Africa, because here you drew these lines based on conquest. This is Kenya. This
Right.
is Nigeria. This is,
Right.
and it had nothing to do with the nations that had been there before our Africa was carved up in the scramble for Africa, which began I think in 1867. With these colonial nations just carving up Africa. And later, King Leopold comes in and goes, well, I just want that little piece there, Nobody wants that. I'll take that piece, And then later, Germany coming in and trying to establish its own colony, but following the colonial practices that they had. And in fact, Hitler wrote a letter to, I forget which American president, praising him for how he used the law to disenfranchise African Americans and Native Americans by making them stateless in their own country, which is what he went back and did to the Jews in Germany, which is to essentially make someone stateless in their own land, or the land where they were born.
Right.
And this is an important part of the whole idea of the colonial project, because many of us even I shouldn't say, not in my generation, but in the generation that came before me, people like Yvonne Blake would tell you stories of going to the hotels in Jamaica. A friend of mine, Niels Peter Blake, told me about his father, who went to one of these posh hotels in Jamaica, and they saw him coming out with his towel wrapped around his waist, and they couldn't. This was unbelievable. And here comes this black man striding through the hotel lobby, walking up to the pool, standing on the edge of the pool, throwing off his towel. Of course, he had swimming trunks, and diving into the pool.
Right.
And they drained the pool after he came out.
Oh my God! Yeah.
So that's the kind of experience that many in the generation that came before me experience, not being people in their own, not recognized as people with rights in their own country. I was born in 58. So in 62, when we got our independence, I was then like, I mean, I grew up as a Jamaican.
Right. 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 It's amazing how close. I mean, it could have been yesterday. I mean, putting aside that ill, unfortunate comment about geriatric, I don't like that at all. I was born in '60, so we are sort of in the same.
Yeah, yes, all right.
Which was the year of the independence of so
Right.
many countries, right?
Yes.
But in Ceylon, we had got our independence back in 1948, a year after India. So I was a 12-year-old in the new country when I was.
Yes.
I mean, the country was 12 years old, the new country, when I was
Right.
born. But anyway, let's. You mentioned earlier, before we close up, I just want to get more of a flavor of some more poems from the book. You also mentioned haiku, which I know is a passion. Uh, the lockup, the pandemic, unlocked so many
Yes.
so many things
Yes.
inside of ourselves. I know that it did for me as well. And
Yes.
haiku are wonderful. So let's hear some of the haiku which are in the book as well, I think,
Yes.
if you like.
Yes. There's a haiku sequence here, and it was, again. I never thought I would be writing haiku, but again, you talk about the plot of your life,
Right.
and it was actually Dennis Scott who introduced me to the haiku form, and suddenly, after reading Gosh, and again rereading Brathwaite, and saying, and realizing what Rastafari had been saying a long time ago, that we needed to come back to the earth, to come back to a fruitful relationship with the earth. So I wrote haikus for the end of the world. Crisp morning glories line the pathway on my walk beside withered trees. Ghost buses rumble past an empty bus shelter while finches build nests. Outside our Publix, homeless men who searched for butts fidget on a bench. The Goodwill's door closed. The homeless man who reads books finds newfound treasures. A murder of crows taunts a schizophrenic girl by stealing her bread. In the parking lot, puis burn a bright yellow, sentinels of hope.
Yeah, I mean, it's outstanding. I mean, you finish with the Sentinels of Hope, a little bit of hope for the
Yeah.
tired and bruised land.
Well, it's like someone once asked James Baldwin, "Do you ever despair?"
Uh,
And Baldwin said, I don't have time for despair. What am I going to tell my nieces, my nephews? What am I going to tell the children? He said, so you always have to be hopeful. You
Yeah.
always have to give the children hope. And
Yeah.
so these were some of the ideas that informed this haiku sequence. That I mean, and we're I think my second or third book of poems was called Hurricane Center. We live in the Caribbean and here in Florida in the midst of the hurricane. We just celebrated, I forget what anniversary of Hurricane Andrew, which devastated South Florida. Which again, you talk about plot point. I lived through Hurricane Andrew. Uh, I didn't know how to prepare for a hurricane. Put up 2 pieces of plywood and hoped for the best.
Can you write poems that can stop hurricanes? I mean, in a sense,
Well,
can we
the
control the weather? Can we
the the
fix
the, the whole
the weather?
the whole idea of the because the hurricane plays an important part in the transfer of energy from the poles and all around. So I think it was Glissant who talked about uh, the Caribbean culture being rhizomatic, and the difference between Caribbean culture and many other cultures, especially when you walk in places like Washington, is you begin to believe in the invincibility and the eternity of marble,
Mm,
and that is a lie. You know, things crumble. As both the novel and the poet said, things fall apart. The center does not hold. And but how do you get through those moments of when things are happening? Well, the only thing that you can do is to have, number one, before the hurricane, before the things change, have a sense of integrity. I mean, one of the I think the things that many stories that Black writers tell is this and this happened. So if we set it up, we say every book asks a question, and the book attempts to answer it, right? So most books about race, which is what frustrated Baldwin and made him write Everybody's Protest novel, right? Most books about race ask this question or answer this question. And the answer is always, it happens to him because he's Black, which becomes boring. But the more interesting novel is, or the more interesting story is, given that Geoffrey is Black, how will he respond with a sense of integrity to the brutalization that happens to him on a daily basis? How will he respond? And that is the story. Not whether you're Black.
right,
Blackness is not the story. Blackness is an addition to the story, an important addition to the story. But how do you keep your integrity? How do you keep your honesty? How do you keep all of these cardinal values that have been stressed all through the years?
right,
And this is where Rastafari again comes back to my rescue,
right.
because Rastafari were pummeled, beaten, down pressed, and even when there's a very interesting story about Rastafari being in being a rounded up, arrested, coming before the court, and the judge says, "And what is your name?" And they go, "Rastafari, one loves." They were either all of them were going to get out of jail, or none of them were going to get out. But Rastafari always responded to any threat with love. And this is why I think Rastafari is such an important part of our culture, because they show us, despite everything else, hold on to your sense of integrity, hold on to your sense, all of these values that we've always said, these are important, that humanity has said, these are important. Hold on to them, they'll get you through anything.
Climate resilience, right? We talk about.
Yes.
So, is that what we can come learn from your poetry? I mean, to become more resilient somehow,
I'm hoping
more
that
flexible.
I'm hoping it points a way, because where we are too late to do anything. We're now talking about mitigation in the Caribbean, and we're
Yeah.
talking about mitigation in the other archipelagos of the world. Uh, so, so what do we do in the meantime? Uh, and urge, you know, light a spark, do something. How do we urge? How do we get our people to begin to recognize and embrace the reality of climate change, when most people just want to dance? I go to Jamaica, and the amount of cars, BMWs, blah blah blah, high-end cars that I see in the capital, and then I read my newspaper, and most of Paris is turning towards bicycles. Something is wrong there. Something is wrong. And so, again, we have to abandon this whole idea of these cars and these things that are outside of us as status symbols. We've totally brought in, the idea, started under Ronald Reagan, greed is good.
Right.
That is being played out. And I think we're seeing the end of it. I hope we see the end of it with Kamala's presidency, that we will end that whole thing and go back to this idea of service, that we don't. And she said it with the whole coconuts thing. Do you think there were people who came before you? There are people who are going to come behind you, after you. What are you doing in this time to make sure that you are doing the best to make sure that the generation that is coming after you is prepared? Garvey talked about this. Leave something for your children to inherit. So all of these ideas are really necessary. And I'm going to be honest. I would prefer to be denounced as a false prophet. That for none of what I'm talking about to come through. Right? But the way it looks more and more dire each day, and we're dancing our way to our demise.
So let's stop the dance, or let's change the nature of the dance.
Yes.
I mean,
How do we?
you can smile, you can dance a little bit as you come off a plane, as
Course.
Kamala does,
Yeah.
onto the runway. But let's get to work.
Yes. I forget who said it in the 60s. What's the point of the revolution if you can't dance or sing?
Right. I don't remember, but it's a wonderful line. Tell me, let's finish with, shall we? And we'll come back and let's chat again sometime. It would be
Yes,
lovely
we should. I love these.
with your next book, or before. How about leaving us with a couple of poems from perhaps you could select a poem that captures some of this conversation. The
Okay,
notion.
I'll end with Archipelagos.
Okay.
The title poem.
Wonderful.
Archipelagos, after Derek Walcott. At the end of this sentence, a flood will rise and swallow low-lying islands of the Caribbean, like when Hurricane Maria whipped the Atlantic into a ring of thunderstorms that advanced in the way Auerbach described her vision of terror. Wooden huts torn away from their foundations were carried away. Women and children were tied to the ceiling beams, but none could see a tangle of arms waving from the roof, like branches blowing in the wind, waving desperately toward heaven, toward the riverbanks for help. And a man, chest deep in the surge that snatched his family away from his arms, in seas swelling before him, like Columbus and his crew imagined a Leviathan, whose mere sight is overpowering, who looked down on all that is haughty. But wasn't it pride, greed, gluttony, those sins we've forgotten, for they remind us of what we could have become instead of what we've settled for, that extended our reach like the virus with its crown of spikes, around the waist of the world to the polar ice caps, melting into the ocean that's rising 1 inch every 3 years in Miami, where leatherbacks lumber out of the water to lay their eggs, as carefully as I swaddle my grandniece in a blanket. Scenes my daughter remembers in the same breath with the bumper sticker on the first car I owned, Save the Whales. The protests where we marched before she could walk. The war she inherited along with my grandmother's hair. That simple country girl from St. James, home to Sam Sharp and the Maroons, who fought redcoats, whose bayonets were stained with the blood of Africans, kidnapped from huts under the growl of the Harmattan sweep over the Sahara, to the rim of the Cape Verde Islands, garlanded by trade winds, that complete the circle and begin a new alphabet of catastrophe. Hurricanes that stagger like a betrayed lover, barreling through the islands until its rage is spent on the sands of our beaches, littered with masks and plastic bottles.
Bravo, bravo.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Geoffrey. Great poem, great book. And
thank you. I thank you for this interview.
Most welcome.
I got to talk about things that I never imagined I would be talking about.
Which is why we have to break the solid barrier. Right? All right. Thank you so much, Geoffrey.
Thank you. Take care of yourselves. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
All right, my friend. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.